All right, today's build is going to be an epoxy guitar body. Right now I'm just taking a look at a template inside a cardboard box that I've chosen. I'm going the real cheap route. I'm going to use a cardboard box and line the heck out of it with Tyvek tape, and you see I have it sitting on some old particle board. So let's get started. All right, my box is Tyvek taped. I've caulked around the edge of the box just in case of any spillover. Spoiler alert, huge mistake. I used a Sharpie to kind of draw the outline of the guitar. That's going to come back to haunt me. And what I opted to do for this one is to use some driftwood that easily splintered into pieces. And if you notice, everything's sort of wide in the back and angled from the neck. So we're going to do a clear epoxy pour with these driftwood pieces just layered up and see what happens. All right, I know it's a little hard to tell here, but I've actually poured a very thin layer of epoxy and I've started setting the driftwood in. If you just use a deep pour, that driftwood's going to float all over the place. And so I just thought I'd just pour a little bit at a time, kind of seal a layer down, pour a little bit more, seal it, and just rinse and repeat all the way up. So that method actually worked pretty good. But if I did it again, I would have individually sealed each piece of driftwood with epoxy because it was a bubble nightmare that I just wasn't able to get under control. So at this point, all the layers have been poured. I spared you watching me do that 6 or 7 times. Another huge mistake as I used a red Sharpie to mark how high I wanted it, because I want about 1 3/4 inches. And just like the one on the bottom, spoiler alert, what happened is that ink just seeped into the epoxy. But anyways, you move forward when you make a mistake, and it's time to try to get this thing out of that box. All right, so here I have demolded the blank. If you're curious, it actually came out of the cardboard very easy. Again, I used Tyvek tape, and I think I even used a spray, like a silicone spray. I just destroyed the box. I wasn't trying to save a free box that came from Amazon. So it really quick work, and now I'm just inspecting it, and I believe that's what will be the front of the guitar, which actually came out pretty good. When I flip it over here in a minute, the back of the guitar revealed all sorts of issues that were actually kind of my fault for not being careful with the tape. So here I had a change of heart. There was enough problems around the edges, and that Les Paul Jr. template was going right to the edge. So I grabbed my Telecaster template, and that fits much better, gives me a lot more room for error. So that's basically why we shifted gears from a Les Paul Jr. to a Telecaster. So here I've just kind of remarked what it's going to look like after I cut out the Telecaster shape, and everything still works for what I'm envisioning. The edges, you can see me kind of pointing out, are definitely sharp and higher because of the pour, so I've got to sand that down because you don't want to do any jigsaw cutting if you have edges that are much higher than the rest of it. So that's what I'm going to do next. Oh, and also, just to take note, at this point, I haven't actually turned it upside down to see the bottom yet, because that's going to be a bit of a surprise when I do that. All right, so I finally turned it upside down, and you can see very clearly there's a strip going right down the middle that's a lot higher than the corresponding sides, which I suspect is a product of the shape of the box, or maybe I just put more tape. I just don't know. I destroyed the box, but I'm about to find out how hard it is to sand, and then I can either sand that down level or simply just pour on each side enough epoxy to bring it back to the same level. And the other thing is quite a bit of gouges where the tape must have been a little crinkled, so I'm kind of pointing out those gouges. So I definitely got some work to do on the bottom of this thing. Okay, so I sanded the sides down so it was reasonably level. Didn't show that, it's just sanding. And now I'm using a jigsaw to cut around. And this is new territory for me. I had no idea if it was going to be easier or harder than wood. And it took a couple tries to find the right blade, but once I found the right blade, actually it cut surprisingly easy. Probably more like a softwood or a maple, or a medium wood, and a little easier than like a hardwood like a maple. So with the shape cut out, I'm basically just opting to do some sanding just to get all the rough edges out and sort of better analyze if I need to put in some more epoxy and some deeper crevices and stuff. So that's what I'm doing here. And while we're watching me do that, here's just some kind of general things to consider if you work with epoxy. The bad, epoxy is messy. I mean, I know sawdust is messy, but epoxy is kind of the next level, and it has a bit of a stink to it. But the good is, unlike wood, if you make a mistake, you can just pour some more epoxy. So, especially if you're new to woodworking or guitar body building, mistakes are a given. So knowing that you can just pretty much fix them really easy is a really nice thing to have in your back pocket. And also, if you go the epoxy route, know that not all epoxy is created equal. There's tabletop epoxy, which is great if you're okay doing a lot of kind of shallow pours. And if you're impatient and want to get it all done at once, there is a deep pour, and some of those will go 4 inches, which is plenty more than enough to do a guitar body. So do look into the differences before you make your purchase, because they are not all the same. All right, so at this point I've got a good rough cut. I've got the edges reasonably sanded, so at least they won't cut me. Another tip when using epoxy, as you sand, of course, you're going to use like 60-80 grit if you're shaping it, and then it's going to make it very hard to see. But if you just have a wet rag, you can just wipe it down and get a pretty good idea of what it'll look like when it's much more clear. So what I'm doing there will be the front of the guitar. Here's the back of the guitar, and I still have to address the gouges left by the tape and also that big stripe that's higher than the rest, which is what I'm going to do next. And so here was the fix. I just put some Tyvek tape around the entire edge of the guitar and just poured some more clear epoxy to fill in the 2 sides that were lower, and also that'll take care of any of those gouges. All right, so here we are a couple days later. I can still feel a slight bump, but visually you can't really see it. Of course, now there's edge issues that I'm gonna have to sand down, but what I think I'm gonna do, or what I decided to do here, was to put in a comfort cut before I went any further. So that's our next step, is comfort cut time. All right, so as far as tools go, I start with the grinder. I then move on to a rasp to kind of fine tune it. Grinder does the bulk of the work. And of course you need to have an idea of where to put it. So I grabbed one that already has one on there and kind of set that next to it so I could use that as a template. Mark that up, and again, grinder first. That takes away the bulk of it and does it fast. So again, be very careful, slow. You don't want to take away too much. And then moved on to the rasp and then finished it up with the sandpaper. And now I've transitioned to the rasp. And don't forget my tip to have a wet rag on standby, because that makes it easy to check your progress. And finally, the sanding step. I think I'm using either 60 or 80 grit. If you're curious, again, sanding was probably the equivalent of, a medium to harder wood. It doesn't go fast, but it goes. All right, with comfort cut done, it's time to refocus on the back of the guitar. Make sure that formerly very high spot is now level. Fix the new edge, get that back down. And if you notice, I actually go back and forth between two different types of sanders. I like to use a palm sander as well as an orbital sander. You don't have to, it's just my personal preference. I like the results, and at least for me, there's kind of advantages to each one depending on the part that you're trying to sand. So one really great thing to note when you're sanding epoxy is it's really easy to see the areas that you've missed. They won't be cloudy. So unlike wood, where sometimes you can't necessarily see it, with epoxy, super obvious, and also super obvious if there's any high or low spots, because again, any place the sander isn't hitting will remain clear. So at this point in the build, it's just sanding, shaping, leveling, rinse, repeat for probably hours, and nobody wants to watch that. So basically, that's what I'm going to do. If there's any more gouges or troubled spots, I'll fill them in, which of course sets me back a day. But that's basically where you're going to spend the bulk of your time if you want to make an epoxy guitar. Well, to be fair, even a wood guitar, you spend the bulk of your time sanding. Here you can see the edges are getting sanded more in the middle, so it's a little low in the middle. One nice thing about epoxy is if you pour it on a nice level surface, it is self-leveling, so it really does make the leveling process pretty easy. There wasn't a whole lot to do with this guitar. And as bad luck has it, I actually accidentally created a gouge right in the little cutaway, so I had to just pour it in, but that's my point. It's pretty much that easy. So I'm gonna end this section with that, and next step is coming up. So with the guitar leveled and reasonably sanded, it's time to address the neck. Here I'm addressing the camera, whining about the weight, but later I do realize this is really just an art piece, and I get over that. Alright, as for the neck, this is about as unscientific as it gets. Just measure the distance between here, find roughly the halfway point, and make that where the middle point of the neck is, and I'm just eyeballing it here. And this is my total redneck way of setting the neck position. I did find a template that I used on a previous project that fit the neck perfect, and basically just using some double-sided tape to secure it. And then I like to use a drill to do at least a lot of the work, so the router doesn't have to do everything. So that's what we're seeing now. Of course, you want to make sure the surface is clean, and that double-sided tape works fantastic. You would be surprised how difficult it is to remove the template when you're done. So don't hesitate to go that route, and it's much easier than trying to work around a clamp. And for those of you stressing that I'm just free-handing the neck placement, don't stress. I can use a straight edge on both sides of the neck, which will determine the placement of the pickups, or in this case pickup, as well as the bridge, so it's all good. And here I'm just figuring out the depth that I want to route out relative to the neck. And as I said, I like to let the drill do the majority of the work. You can see that attachment, which helps hold it perfectly vertical, reasonably cheap, 20 bucks, something like that on Amazon. Oh yeah, and equally important, it has a stop you can set to make sure that you're consistently drilling the same depth. And epoxy's messy. You can see it sort of spirals up the drill bit, but it actually drills just fine. And here I'm just measuring the depth. And of course, better to go too shallow. You can fix that, but you can't really fix it the other way without re-pouring epoxy. And before you route, just double check that depth and make darn sure that your bearing is the right height for your template. On an earlier video, that cherry wood video I posted, slipped under the template, and that caused all sorts of havoc, especially in the neck pocket. So take your time, measure twice, you'll be fine. And I did this in a couple passes just to make sure that I didn't go too deep. And when it came time to inspect the fitting, I noticed the neck was sort of angled up, which caused a little panic, but it turns out there was just a little teeny bit of epoxy that I had missed with the route, so I just went in and filed it down carefully, and then it sat beautifully down. And with that high spot addressed, you can see it now fits very nice, but there's a spot I'm pointing at there. Normally that wouldn't be there. I have to decide whether to leave it or get rid of it, because I just don't know how strong that epoxy is, so maybe that little extra support's good, I'm not sure. Standard Telecaster depth's about 1 3/4 inches, and I'm roughly 2 millimeters higher than that. So I'm just going to start leveling this out on the back side. I'm going to leave the front since I have that neck pocket. I don't want to mess that up. But what I'm doing now is I'm starting to remove from the back, and I'm going to, here real shortly, find out that's going to take forever, so I'm going to have to come up with a better strategy. Alright, I'm still concerned about the weight. It's about 2 millimeters thicker than the traditional 1 3/4. So I used the router to kind of give me that new edge that I was thinking of blending in. I'll be honest, the first thing I thought of is to put a faux binding, do some really cool colored epoxy, and that would look great, but that would not solve the thickness issue, nor would it the weight issue, because it's about 13 pounds. I'd like to get that under 12 if possible. So instead, I think I'm going to use a grinder or sander or both, and now try to sort of blend this in to remove a pretty considerable amount. And to be clear, this is from the back of the guitar. I want the front of the guitar to stay nice and straight. Let's see how it goes. I'm going to kind of breeze by this because in essence it's the same thing I did when I put in the belly cut, although I'm using a little less aggressive end on the grinder. But start with the grinder and then finish with the sanding, and that brought in the sides quite a bit actually. So here I'm talking to the camera, but a truck went by making noisy. But basically what I'm saying is that strategy to grind away the edges of the back netted about 1/2 pound of weight loss. So it's getting closer to my 12-pound goal. I think I said this earlier, but yeah, use some water on a rag so you can get a better idea of what your progress is. And I'm basically saying there's some chip outs where that driftwood, it's not the epoxy, it's actually once you expose the driftwood, it's so brittle that it caused a few gouges, and then I think I upended some air bubbles as well. So basically I'm just going to put some epoxy on those troubled spots And then obviously that's game over for the day, because I like to let that stuff dry for at least 24 hours before I head back to the guitar. So it was a very productive day. We got a nice tight neck pocket. We've eliminated about half a pound, and I just got to decide whether I want to implore that on the front or not. So we'll find out what I do when I return. Done enough mods and builds that I have a lot of parts that are kind of left over sitting in a box, and that's what I'm going to do with this guitar. So here I'm just kind of mocking it up. I'm going to go with a hardtail bridge, obviously a Fender style, and then I'm just going to do one humbucker because obviously I want to show off the wood inside the epoxy. As I'm looking at this, since it's a single pickup guitar, I may actually move that a little more forward. In case you haven't figured out, I'm narrating these after each day of filming, so I actually have no idea where this is going to go. I'll decide on the electronics configuration later, but I was about to mount the neck and realized that the holes in the neck do not line up to my plate. So the first thing I need to do is to fill those holes in so I can put new ones in, and there's dowels, or you can simply use toothpicks and wood glue, which is what I did. And here I'm just double checking the fit to make sure I'm happy with it before I start drilling. And I like to use the neck plate. Obviously I'm putting it on the inside of the route to help me align the screws. And honestly, here's a very inexpensive tool that every shop needs. This will help you ensure that you're drilling the right size holes. In case of a guitar, I want those screws to easily go through the body and only screw into the neck. This requires 2 different size drill bits, which is what I'm figuring out here. It's hard to see, but the neck plate is taped down, and I use my drill guide to get all 4 holes started, and then I remove it and just finish it by hand. Well, that was dumb camera placement. I used some painter tape on the drill bit so I'd know where to stop, and now it's time to drill the pilot holes into the neck. In case I didn't mention it, this is a cheap neck off a $100 pawn shop guitar. So now I'm mounting the neck so I can make my final measurements for where the electronics compartment's going to go, for where the pickup is going to go, and of course the bridge. I should mention that I had previously installed some Fender tuners and did a fret level on this neck, so it is ready to roll. So even though the neck will come back off, I like to do all my measurements with the neck so I can use a straight edge and just make sure everything is exactly where it needs to be. Here I've decided on my final measurements, my final placement, and I'm going to start by routing the pickup. I use double-sided tape on all my templates, much easier than trying to clamp down and work around the clamps, and just make sure the surface is clean. My least favorite tool to use in the shop is the hand router. If I'm going to make a mistake, that's usually the source of it. So I like to drill out as much of the pocket as possible using a drill and a Forstner bit. And here I am at the helm of my nemesis, and spoiler alert, of course, I make a stupid mistake. So basically, I chipped out the edge of the route because I was too impatient to wait for the router to stop turning before I tried to remove it. Really stupid. But you keep moving forward. Time to deal with the route for the control panel. I decided on a traditional tele panel. I struggled with this one because, I don't know what would be cooler, to hide the electronics, which is what this is going to do, or to see them through the epoxy. So I don't know, time will tell, but I decided to go with the hide option. And this is the same exact method I just showed for the pickup. I used the drill bit, then I switched to the router, so we're gonna jump ahead here. After the routes, holes need to be drilled to connect the control panel, not just to the pickup, but also for the ground wire under the bridge. And now it's time to address my mistake. Since I'm mixing up some epoxy anyways, I'm gonna seal the inside of the cavities, just because that driftwood's so fragile. The epoxy takes about a day to dry, and then it's time for the endless finishing work. Sanding, sanding, sanding. Alright, the next day it was time to check on the repair job. As you can see, one great advantage to epoxy, very easy to fill in any gouges or nicks. Works great. Just a little bit of a sharp edge to contend with. So my task on this day was to use the orbital sander, starting with 60 grit and going up to 600 grit. This is just getting started. Ultimately, I will be into the thousands grit-wise and be doing wet sanding, as I'm going to use sandpaper to polish it up as much as I can. The only thing worse than sanding is watching somebody sand, so I'm going to blow through this section, but I will leave you with a few tips. Number 1, proper sanding takes a lot of patience. In real time, just these grits took me over 3 hours. So be very patient and don't try to rush through it. It's important that you go through each grit and that you spend enough time to do the job properly, or you won't have an even finish at the end. Tip number 2, pick an order and stick with it. You'd be surprised how easy it is to lose track of what you've done and what you haven't, but if you stick to an order, you're less likely to lose track. Tip 3, and this is very specific to epoxy, don't get frustrated if it looks like you're not gaining any ground. You won't notice a significant increase in clarity till you get to the higher grits. Finally, tip 4, use quality sandpaper. And also make sure that it's wet, dry sandpaper, especially when we get to the higher grits. We're going to do a lot of wet sanding. And next time we meet, I'll tackle these grits. Again, the only thing worse than sanding is watching somebody sand, so I'm just going to blow through this and pick it up at the next section. If you're curious, I think I ended up going to roughly 2,000, maybe 2,500 grit, and I did do a little bit of wet sanding by hand at that higher grit. Alright, so it's now time to polish it up, starting with some rubbing compound. Both the rubbing compound and the polish are Meguiar's, actually the car stuff. Honestly, not sure if that's the way to go or if you should stick to the epoxy specific. I kind of figure it probably doesn't matter, but I could be wrong. Maybe next project I'll try the epoxy specific stuff, but either way, it seemed to do the job. And I guess this was a reminder that I did 2 coats of the compound before moving on to the shining polish. Here I switched to cloth to buff it out and then just rinse and repeat for all the sides. So now it's time to get to the fun part, the assembly. Definitely not the best lighting, but you get the idea. Alright, for my favorite part, the final assembly. You can see I've just laid out all the parts that I'll use. Going with just one volume and one jack, both placed on a Telecaster style control plate. And since I ordered a control plate without any holes, I'm just using my favorite cheap tool to figure out exactly what size hole I need to drill. I believe it landed at 3/8, which is a bit of a bite to take for just one pass, so I'm doing a pilot hole with a much smaller bit before I go to the 3/8 bit. And now I'm moving on to the larger 3/8 Forstner bit. And of course this is done for both the volume potentiometer as well as the jack. And now for the soldering, which is actually one of my favorite parts about a guitar build. With just one volume and a jack, this is about as simple as can be. I like to solder away from the guitar body until it gets to the pickups and the ground wire. And here's another tip: check to make sure the pickups work before you install them. It could save you a lot of troubleshooting frustration. Ask me how I know. Thought about direct mounting, but decided to go with the pickup ring because it looks better, but I still like to put a little foam underneath it even with the pickup ring. It just helps hold that pickup in place. It's obviously an aesthetic preference, but I just think that black pickup ring looks really good with that Telecaster control plate that's also black. Here I am tightening down the bridge after measuring for the appropriate scale. This particular bridge is held down by 3 screws, so I start with the one in the middle, and now I'm drilling pilot holes for the other 2. And as a general rule, I like to do the final tightening by hand as opposed with an electric screwdriver or drill. And with the bridge in place, I'm now screwing down the pickup rings. And after drilling pilot holes and screwing down the control plate, it's time to string up the guitar. This bridge type has to be disassembled to be screwed down properly, but that does make stringing it up a little bit easier. And while stringing up the guitar, I also like to adjust the saddle heights as well as focus on the intonation. I'm breezing by it here, but the setup is arguably the most important part of that final assembly. It needs to be very playable and needs to stay in tune. We'll end this with a playing sample, but first here is a final assembly shot of the guitar I affectionately call the Swamp. The audio's a positive grid spark, just as it was captured by my camera. No fancy trickery.